I'm broken, God. I'm broken. Ah!
The rain didn't just fall that morning. It poured like the sky was grieving. Edward stood in the middle of the empty street, drenched and trembling. His shirt was soaked to his skin, his shoes sank in the mud, and in his hand, he held a small, torn bag and a family photo. The faces in that photo once carried all his joy. A smiling woman, a small boy, and a man who once believed love could last forever. He stared at the picture as the raindrops struck it, turning the smiles into tiny rivers of ink. The thunder whispered somewhere far away, slow and mournful, like the heavens were crying with him. For a long moment, Edward didn't move. He just stood there, silent, broken, and tired of pretending to be strong. Then, with a shaking hand, he placed the photo gently on the wet ground. He watched the water wash over it, carrying away what used to be his happiness. His lips parted, but the only sound that came out was a whisper, soft, almost lost in the rain. I gave her everything, all my love, all my hard work, and now there's nothing left of me. 4 years earlier, the world was brighter for Edward. The sun rose gently over the busy streets where Edward walked every morning. His clothes were always dusty, his hands rough, but his heart was full of hope. He worked 2 jobs, saving every tiny paper of money with one goal: to give Annabella a better life. He believed in love, in sacrifice, and in a future that was waiting for both of them. He lived in a small room with barely enough space for a bed and a table, but he carried a joy that money couldn't buy. Every morning, he went to work early and returned late at night, tired but proud. He would rest his head and smile at the thought of Annabella's laughter. It gave him the strength to wake up and do it all over again. He paid her school fees, sent her money for food, and sometimes skipped his own meals just to see her happy. His friends warned him that love could change when life becomes easy, but he never believed it. He trusted her completely. He believed that their story would end in happiness, not heartbreak. Every month, he sent Annabella gifts, flowers, little notes, small surprises that made her smile. He dreamed of the day she would finish school, get a job, and they would start a family together. He often told himself that she was his purpose, his reward for every long day he worked. But even as the sun shone over his hard work, a quiet storm was already forming in the distance, one that would soon test everything he believed about love. Edward's life became a quiet song of sacrifice. Each day started before sunrise and ended long after the city had gone to sleep. He worked at a small car wash by day and carried heavy loads at the market by night. His hands were rough, his eyes tired, but every drop of sweat had meaning. It was all for Annabella. When she got into the university, he felt like his dreams were finally coming true. He sold his old phone, borrowed money from friends, and even stopped eating lunch so he could pay her school fees. Every time she called him my hero, he felt alive again. Then came the news that changed everything. Annabella was expecting a child. At first, Edward was scared. He didn't know how they would manage. but he promised to stand by her no matter what. "Don't worry, my sunshine," he said softly. "I'll handle it all." And he did. He worked harder than ever, saving every small note of money. He rented a small room near her school and even hired a kind nanny to help her with cooking and care. He never complained. When people asked why he looked so tired, he only smiled and said, "Love is not easy, but it's worth it." But not everyone saw it that way. Annabella's parents didn't like him. They said he had nothing to offer. They wanted someone with a big job, a car, and money to spare. They often told their daughter, Annabella, "You are too young to suffer with him." She tried to defend Edward. She told them, "He may be poor now, but he loves me." Her voice trembled, but her heart still believed in him. At least, for now. Sometimes when Edward visited her at school, he noticed small changes. Annabella was quieter, more distant. She started spending time with a new friend, a coursemate named Collins. He was always around, smiling too much, joking too often. Edward didn't say anything. He trusted her. One afternoon, as Edward dropped off food for her, he saw Collins standing too close. Their laughter filled the air, light and playful. Annabella waved and said it was nothing, just a friend helping her with assignments. Edward smiled, pretending not to notice the strange feeling growing inside him. That night, he went back to his small room and sat in silence. He stared at the photo of Annabella on his wall, the same smile that kept him going, and whispered to himself, "It's fine. She loves me." But deep inside, a tiny shadow began to form, one that would soon change everything. The sound of rain fell softly on the zinc roof as Edward sat on his small bed, staring at the letter in his hand. It was from his day job, short and painful. "We are sorry to inform you," that was all he needed to read. He had just lost his job. 2 days later, the night shift at the market ended too. The boss said business was slow and they couldn't keep everyone. Edward smiled weakly and thanked him before walking into the cold night, his shoes splashing through puddles. Inside, he felt something heavy break, but he didn't show it. He couldn't tell Annabella. She had enough to think about: her studies, the baby, and her health. So he hid it. Every morning, he still left the house at the same time, pretending to go to work. He would sit in the park for hours, counting the little money he had left, thinking of new ways to survive. When Annabella called, he spoke with energy, saying things like, "Don't worry, my love, everything's fine. I'm just tired from work." He didn't want her to worry. He didn't want her to see his fear. But secrets never stay hidden for long. One afternoon, Annabella visited him without warning. The room was quiet. There was no sound of a running fan or his work uniform hanging by the door. She looked around, confused. "Edward, are you not working today?" she asked softly. He froze. His heart raced. He tried to smile, but his lips trembled. I took the day off." But her eyes said she didn't believe him. A few days later, she found out the truth from a mutual friend. The moment she saw him, her tone had changed. The warmth in her voice was gone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her words sharp but quiet. Edward dropped his gaze. "I didn't want you to worry," he whispered. Annabella sighed and looked away. "You bounce back, right? I don't want to suffer again," she said, her words cutting deeper than she knew. Edward nodded, forcing a smile. "I'll find something. I promise." But soon after, something else began to shift. Annabella kept mentioning one name, Collins. He was one of her besties and always willing to help. He had a nice car, dressed well, and always spoke softly to her. Edward noticed how her eyes lit up when she mentioned him. He tried to laugh it off, but a strange tension began to grow between them, slow, silent, and dangerous. And in that moment, Edward didn't know it yet, but life was about to test his love in ways he never imagined. Slowly, something shifted between them. Annabella no longer smiled the way she used to. Her laughter, once warm and sweet, now sounded distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. She started dressing differently. New clothes, brighter shoes, and perfumes Edward had never seen before filled the room. When he asked where she got them, she would say lightly, "A colleague helped me pick them. I have to look professional now." At first, Edward smiled and nodded. He wanted to be proud of her growth. But soon, he started to notice other things. The way she checked her phone constantly. The way her face glowed each time a message popped up. She would laugh softly to herself, then hide her phone when Edward walked in. Sometimes, Edward stayed up late, pretending to be asleep just to watch her. The soft light from her phone reflected on her face as she typed and giggled quietly. Every word she sent felt like a small piece of her drifting away from him. One afternoon, while walking home from a small job interview, Edward met his old friend Uche. They talked briefly before Uche gave him a long look and said quietly, "My guy, you need to be careful, oh. You are losing your woman, Annabella." Edward laughed weakly, pretending not to understand. "What do you mean?" Uche shook his head. "Just open your eyes. Women change when their world changes." That night, Edward sat alone on the edge of the bed. His heart felt heavy. He remembered all the nights he worked late to pay her school fees, the mornings he skipped breakfast so she could eat. He remembered how she used to wait for him outside the gate, running into his arms the moment she saw him. Now, she barely looked up when he entered the room. The distance between them was no longer measured by space, but by silence. Every unspoken word built a wall between their hearts. Annabella's voice had changed too, softer but colder. She spoke less about their dreams and more about her new world, her colleagues, her projects, and her future. Edward listened quietly, forcing a smile each time. But deep down, something told him the woman he fell in love with was slowly fading away, and he didn't know how to stop it. 2 years later, their little boy, Daniel, had grown, and Annabella was now working and making good money, while Edward is still hunting for jobs. One Sunday afternoon, Annabella invited a few of her friends over. They were all dressed nicely, laughing loudly as they talked about work, travel, and plans. Edward stayed in the corner, cleaning the dishes quietly. He didn't want to disturb them. Then, one of her friends asked jokingly, "Bella, how's your husband managing these days?" Annabella laughed lightly. "Oh, he's jobless but still eats 3 times a day, so I guess he's doing fine," she said, smiling as her friends laughed. The laughter echoed in Edward's ears like a slow knife. He froze, his hands shaking slightly. For a second, the whole world went quiet. He looked up, meeting Annabella's eyes, hoping she'd realize what she just said. But she didn't. She only looked away. He said nothing. He smiled softly and continued washing the plates, not because it didn't hurt, but because he didn't want to cause a scene. He chose peace, even when it burned inside. Later that night, their little boy, Daniel, ran into the room and climbed on Edward's lap. He laughed and said playfully, "Daddy, you are lazy, just like Mommy said." Edward froze again. The words hit him harder than anything before. He didn't scold the child. He only smiled faintly, brushing his hair gently. "Go and play, my boy," he whispered. When Daniel left, Edward sat still for a long time. His eyes stared at nothing, his chest heavy. Every memory, every sacrifice replayed in his mind like a slow, painful movie. He had given everything, yet somehow ended up feeling smaller with each passing day. That night, while Annabella slept, Edward sat quietly by the window, staring at the moon. The silence of the night felt too loud. But deep inside that silence, a small thought began to grow. He picked up his phone, opened his old laptop, and began searching for job openings. His fingers shook as he typed. Hours passed. Then he saw something, a vacancy for an administrative role at Annabella's company. He looked at the screen for a long time, his heart racing. It felt strange, yet right. Without a word, he filled the form, attached his CV, and clicked apply. The screen blinked for a second, then displayed a small message. Application submitted successfully. Edward leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. For the first time in months, he felt a spark of hope. But what he didn't know was that this single decision would soon change everything. The next morning, the sun came slowly through the curtains, lighting up the small living room where Edward sat. His heart was lighter that day. He had finally applied for a good job. Not just any job, but a position at Annabella's company. For the first time in months, he felt a small sense of pride. Maybe, just maybe, life was about to turn around. At work, Annabella received an email from the HR department. It was short, polite, and carried a name that made her pause. Edward Adams, applicant for administrative officer. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, quietly, she walked into her manager's office and said softly, "Sir, about that man who applied earlier, please don't hire him. He's not really capable of that position." The manager nodded without question. He respected her opinion. The matter ended there. Back home, Edward waited every day with hope. Each time his phone buzzed, he rushed to check if it was an interview invite. But days turned to weeks, and silence became his only reply. One evening, as the sun set, Annabella walked into the living room holding her phone and said calmly, "Edward, I've been thinking, since you're home all day, maybe we should let the nanny go. You can handle the chores. I'll even pay you monthly." Edward's face fell slowly. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. He tried to smile, but his voice broke a little. He asked softly, "You pay me?" She nodded quickly, scrolling through her phone, not even looking at him. Yes, it's better that way and saves me money. Something inside Edward sank deeply. His chest tightened as if the air around him had thinned. He remembered all the nights he stayed up working to pay Annabella's rent, all the days he skipped meals so she could have enough. He didn't argue. He simply stood up, walked quietly into their small bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. For a long time, he just stared at the floor, trying to understand how love had changed so fast. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, a quiet warning of the storm that was coming. Days turned into weeks, and the peace in Edward's heart slowly faded away. The woman he once loved, the one who used to smile whenever he entered the room, now treated him like a shadow that refused to leave. Every morning began with silence, and every evening ended with tension. Annabella's words grew sharper, her tone colder. Small things turned into arguments, a misplaced plate, a forgotten towel, a meal not served fast enough. One afternoon, while Edward was cleaning the dining area, she came in from work looking upset. Without saying much, she dropped her bag on the table and frowned. The air felt tight. Edward tried to speak softly, asking if she was okay. Instead, she snapped. Her hand swept across the table, sending a plate crashing to the floor. The sound echoed through the house. Their little boy, Daniel, ran out of his room, frightened. Edward quickly bent down to pick up the pieces, his hands trembling, his eyes wet but calm. That night, when the house was quiet again, Edward packed his small bag. He had made up his mind. It was time to leave. He couldn't take it anymore. But as he reached for the door, Annabella's voice stopped him. "If you walk out of this house, you will never see your son again," she said quietly, her eyes cold. Edward froze. His chest tightened, and his hand slowly dropped from the door handle. The thought of losing his little boy felt worse than anything else. So he turned back, put his bag down, and sat silently on the floor. From that night on, the house felt even smaller. Annabella began taking late-night calls again, whispering softly in the guest bedroom. He could hear bits and pieces, laughter, sighs, words that made his heart race. One night, as he walked past the hallway, he stopped when he heard her say softly, "You'll divorce him soon, right?" His blood ran cold. He stood still, not breathing, his mind spinning. Divorce? Who was she talking to? He didn't confront her. He went back to his bed, pretending to sleep, but his mind couldn't rest. Every sound in the night made him flinch. Every vibration of her phone made his heart jump. He looked over at Daniel, sleeping peacefully, and whispered to himself, "For my boy, I'll stay just a little longer." But deep inside, Edward knew something was no longer right. Something bigger, something painful was coming. One fateful evening, the air was calm, but Edward's heart felt restless. Annabella had just finished dressing up, wearing her favorite red dress and soft perfume, the same one she used to wear during their happier days. She said she was going out for a work meeting. Her tone was quick, casual. Edward nodded quietly and watched her walk out, her heels tapping softly on the floor. But something about that night felt strange. It wasn't the first time she had left so suddenly, but tonight, something in her eyes looked different. As the door closed behind her, Edward sat still for a few moments, his mind spinning. He glanced at the clock. 7:42 p.m. Too late for a meeting, he thought. After a few minutes of silence, He stood up, put on a jacket, and stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was dark and the clouds looked heavy. He followed her from a distance, careful not to be seen. His heart pounded harder with each step. She walked fast, entered a cab, and Edward quickly caught another one behind hers. After a short ride, the cab stopped in front of a bright, fancy restaurant downtown. Through the glass walls, he saw people laughing, eating, and smiling under golden lights. And then he saw her. Annabella was sitting by the window, not alone. Across from her sat a man Edward recognized instantly. It was Collins, her colleague. Edward's breath caught. For a moment, the world stood still. He could see her laughing softly, leaning forward, her eyes shining in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. Collins held her hand gently across the table. Edward didn't move closer. He just stood there, outside, in the cold, watching through the glass. His body felt frozen, but his heart was burning. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier. It soaked his clothes, but he didn't care. Drops mixed with the tears he didn't even realize were falling. He stepped back slowly, into the shadows, the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. In that moment, something inside him broke quietly. He whispered to himself, "Maybe she already left me long ago." As he walked back home in the rain, his shoes splashing through puddles, he made a silent promise in his heart that by tomorrow morning he would be gone. Gone from the pain, gone from the humiliation, gone from the love that no longer loved him back. But deep inside, Edward didn't know that fate had other plans. The morning came quietly after a long night of rain. The air smelled fresh, but inside the house, everything felt tense and heavy. Edward sat by the edge of the bed, tired from crying, his mind already made up. Today, he was leaving. He had packed a small bag the night before. Nothing much, just a few clothes and his little brown diary. That diary held every pain, every word he couldn't say out loud. He planned to leave it hidden, but something in him wanted to take it along, like a piece of himself he couldn't abandon. As he walked into the living room, Annabella stood by the mirror, getting ready for work. Her voice cut through the silence. "Edward," she said sharply, not looking at him. "Why didn't you iron my clothes? You had the whole night to do that." Edward froze, confused. He hadn't expected a fight this early. "I'm sorry, babe. I'll do it now." But his calmness only made her angrier. She turned to him, eyes fierce. "You are not even man enough to wash ordinary shirts. What kind of a lazy man are you, Edward?" The words hit him like a storm. He tried to hold his tears, tried to stay composed. "Please, Bella, Before he could finish, her hand swung and landed a hot slap on his face. The sound echoed through the house. It was the first time she had ever done that. For a second, everything went silent. Even Daniel, their son, who had been playing in the next room, peeked out in confusion. Edward didn't say a word. He only looked at her, his eyes full of quiet pain. Not anger, not hatred, just disbelief. Annabella turned away, breathing hard. "Get out," she said coldly. "Get out of my house now. I'm done with this useless marriage."
The rain poured without mercy that morning. The sky was grey and thunder rolled in the distance as Edward walked along the lonely road, drenched from head to toe. His heart felt heavier than the rain that soaked his clothes. His steps were slow, his eyes lost. He didn't even know where he was going. At one point, he stumbled near the roadside. But Edward kept walking. And then, out of nowhere, a car's headlights cut through the mist. It slowed down beside him and stopped. The window rolled down, and a woman's soft voice called, "Hey, Edward!" He looked up, confused. A tall lady stepped out, holding a big umbrella over her head. Her face carried both shock and concern. She was dressed neatly, her eyes kind but wide with surprise. "Jesus! Sonia, is this really you?" Edward shouted through the rain, blinking. Yes, it was Sonia, the same woman he had helped years ago, back when he still smiled easily and believed the world was fair. Edward once gave Sonia 500,000 naira when her mother was sick and in need of surgery. That day, she cried and promised never to forget his kindness. Now, here she was, years later, staring at him like she had seen a ghost. His clothes were soaked, his hair messy, and his hands shivering from cold. "Edward, what happened to you?" she whispered, rushing to his side. Without waiting for an answer, she opened the car door. "Please get in. You can't stay out here." Edward hesitated for a moment, then nodded. The warmth of the car hit him like a gentle hug. Sonia handed him a towel and turned up the heater. The soft hum of the engine and the patter of the rain made everything feel unreal. As she drove, she kept glancing at him as if trying to understand how someone so kind could look so broken. When they got to Sonia's big house, the rain had stopped. Edward sat on the couch holding a cup of tea that was already cold. He stared at nothing. His heart looked tired. Then he began to talk, slowly. He told Sonia about Annabella, how she came into his life like the morning sun, how she made him happy, how everything later broke apart. His voice was calm, but his words were full of pain. Sonia sat quietly and listened. But when Edward said the name Annabella, her eyes changed. That name, it sounded familiar. Could it be the same woman who worked for her? The one who was always smiling, smart, and beautiful, but somehow distant? Her heart started to beat fast. The more Edward spoke, the more she knew it was the same Annabella. When Edward finished his story, Sonia couldn't speak. She was shocked. She couldn't believe the woman who broke Edward's heart worked in her own company. After a long silence, Sonia moved closer. "Edward," she said softly, "you helped me when you had nothing. You gave me hope when I was lost. Now it's my turn to help you." Edward looked down. Sonia, I don't want pity," she said gently. "This is not pity. I respect you. You are a good man, Edward. I've seen it. You're the kind of person I want in my team." He was quiet for a while, then nodded slowly. Something warm returned to his heart. After that day, things began to change. He got a haircut, new clothes. He started to smile again. When he looked in the mirror, he almost recognized himself. At work, Edward worked hard. He fixed problems. He helped people. Everyone liked him even though he didn't know his story. Sonia was proud of him. In a few weeks, he became one of the best workers. Sonia promoted him as the new manager because he earned it. Every night, Edward stayed late looking out the window at the city lights. For the first time in years, he felt peace. He could breathe again. But peace didn't last forever. One afternoon, Sonia came into his office. She looked nervous and held a file close to her chest. "Edward," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He looked up. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "It's Annabella. She's resuming work tomorrow." The pen slipped from his hand and hit the floor. The sound was small, but it felt very loud. The next morning, the sun shined gently through the glass walls of the company building. Annabella walked in, dressed in her usual confident style, her heels clicking, perfume trailing in the air. Everyone greeted her politely as she passed. She smiled proudly, unaware of the surprise waiting behind the manager's door. She had just returned from her short leave, ready to continue where she stopped, but something felt different. The workers seemed more focused, the environment calmer, and oddly, everyone acted more disciplined than before. She smiled faintly. "Maybe the new manager is doing well," she whispered, adjusting her purse. When she reached the manager's office, she knocked lightly and pushed the door open. Then she froze. Sitting behind the big mahogany desk was Edward. Not the broken man she once knew, but a completely transformed version of him. His shirt was crisp, his beard well trimmed, and his eyes held quiet authority. The same man she once shattered now looked like someone the world could no longer break. "Good morning, Miss Annabella," Edward said, politely, his tone steady and formal. Her fingers loosened around her purse. The color drained from her face. "Edward," she whispered. He nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, it's good to see you again. Please, have a seat." The room went silent. The ticking of the clock filled the air. Annabella could barely breathe. The flashbacks of their past came rushing back. The fights, the tears, the betrayal. But Edward looked calm, too calm. He opened the file and flipped through some papers. "Welcome back from your leave. I trust you had a restful break." Her lips trembled. She couldn't speak. Her eyes darted to the glass wall. And there, standing outside nervously, was Collins. The same man she had once risked everything for. Edward followed her gaze. His eyes met Collins through the glass. Collins froze. A cold smile curved on Edward's lips, not of anger, but confirmation. He'd been right all along. Because during Annabella's leave, he had secretly taken their son Daniel for a DNA test. And the results were still in his drawer, written in bold letters. Paternity result, not a match. Edward could barely believe his eyes. The same boy he has suffered and sacrificed everything for is not his biological son. Collins was the real father. Edward wept inside his heart. He gently closed the file, looked back at Annabella and said calmly, "Let's focus on work, Miss Annabella. We have targets to meet." She nodded weakly, not knowing that behind that calm face, the truth had already shattered everything she thought she still had. Days went by after that reunion. Annabella could no longer focus at work. Every time she entered the office, whispers followed. Her pride had melted into silence. Edward remained polite, firm but distant. He no longer looked at her the same way. And that coldness hurt more than any insult. Sonia, the company owner, observed quietly. She saw the fall of a proud woman and the quiet rise of a man once broken. One afternoon, while Annabella prepared coffee in the office pantry, she overheard two staff whispering nearby. "Did you hear?" one said. "Collins has been spending time with a new staff lately." The other gasped. "Wait, the same Collins who dated Annabella?" "Yes," the first one said softly. "He's already moved on." The cup slipped from Annabella's trembling hands. Coffee splashed across the counter. Her lips shook. Her eyes watered. She realized that the man she lost everything for, her home, her peace, her family, had replaced her without a second thought. That evening, she gathered courage and walked into Edward's office. He was reading a report, calm as ever. "Edward," her voice broke, "please, I'm sorry for everything. Don't take Daniel away from me. He's all I have." Edward slowly stood. His face was unreadable. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just walked toward her, handed her a folded document, and whispered, "You should read this." Confused, Annabella opened the paper. Her eyes widened as she saw it. The DNA result. The room spun around her. Her knees weakened. Edward looked at her one last time and said quietly, "I don't need revenge, Annabella. Life has already done that." Then he walked away, leaving her trembling and clutching the paper to her chest as tears rolled down her cheeks. The once proud Annabella was now alone, broken beyond repair, and the truth she hid for years had finally found her.